So I guess we could start at powerful arguments against IDS. One of them that I said was conceptual confusion. And I just said that there's no clear consensus on why certain values are connected. That was kind of like in the beginning of the reading. And then I also just said a lack of clarity. Most of the concepts are vague. And it makes the other problems difficult to get past. Yeah, I also said it was diluted with a broad point of view and lacks critical base. In the reading, it also says it lacks rigor. And then it just has intentional confusion.
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely pretty, pretty vague field in terms of, especially just relative to like other disciplines, you know what I mean? It's just a lot less defined, it feels like.
Yeah, I got that impression throughout the whole reading because it was quite long. And like in each paragraph, I think they mentioned like on every page how like ideas were unclear, vague, or too broad. Like those were very prominent in the reading.
Yeah, I definitely agree. One of the things I thought was a really powerful argument against IDS is just really being able to be fully versed in the two disciplines that you're really going for. You know what I mean? Because I remember the reading mentioned like in a typical school year, you have 120 hours, credit hours. It's hard to be like well versed in I guess two different subjects and just I guess the general umbrella of interdisciplinary stuff that you have to do like on top of that. um I know that's one thing I'm concerned about going into like going into the workplace after college is am I going to have like the skills of an engineering management major, or am I going to have the skills of a business major? You know what I mean? Like enough of either of them. So that's one that really struck a chord, I guess, with me.
I think that kind of relates to why the argument is worth taking seriously, because I think it's more impactful on how it's going to relate to the workplace. I feel like that'll be the biggest argument is if it's has close enough ties to something that you want to do. And if it's substantial enough to like other people that want the same job as you.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess you know, just worried about why hire me over someone that actually graduated in that major, right? I guess all you can really do is just keep building your resume, right? Keep learning new things. Um, just I guess keep building your skills in general, right? And experience.
Yeah, there was a part in the reading, like at the end, where it was talking about uh, retaining existing faculty both to sharpen your interdisciplinary competence and to provide them with formal interdisciplinary credentials. And then that can be done through seminars, workshop, institutes, courses, graduate programs. So those can all be helpful with IDS. And that could be helpful in the workplace as well by making yourself look knowledgeable on the topic.
Yeah.
And I guess that kind of relates to the most or powerful arguments for IDS too. That there are programs that do look good when you're trying to find a job. And because it's such a new degree, it's more progressive in that way. And I feel like it would be sometimes, depending on what the employer is looking for, it may be more like they may be more curious about it, which could be good in your circumstance.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely something that I would look into.
Me personally, having gone through this and just looking through all 5 of the arguments again, I personally didn't find myself really agreeing with any of them or really thinking that any of them really had any merit. I could almost quite easily refute all of them. So I'd say the only thing that I could possibly kind of say could be somewhat of like a powerful argument would be the case of conceptual confusion that was being referred to, really due to the fact that something that we had talked about earlier in this class and just in our group as well was this concept of the tolerance of ambiguity, right? And when you are comparing or drawing from 2 different disciplines at once, confusion is almost inevitable. But the thing is people that are practice interdisciplinary methods embrace the confusion, right? They welcome it, they love it. It's a challenge, and out from that comes a new solution. But to many people, that ambiguousness could be perceived and misconstrued into confusion, right? So I think that could be the greatest argument against it. But to say that it seriously rests on just mere conceptual confusion, I think is flawed. I think it's all just perspective, really.
Yeah, and I think it's not, I don't know how really to put it, but it's not like new. For many majors, you get confused with multiple
With
things.
multiple
I
things,
mean,
exactly.
so it's not really something that's going to make or break your decision on whether you want to go with that
But
degree or not.
really, apart from that, I don't really see why, I don't see the benefit in being disciplinary unless, you're going to be going into law, or even with law, I mean, you're really practicing multiple disciplines at once. But unless you're going to be like a doctor or something of the sort, we've now entered a world where it's everything we're looking for is problem and resolution or problem solution. And the most powerful way you can kind of discover solutions or create solutions these days is through an interdisciplinary manner. I think something that's flawed in the perspective of this author's argument is that he views being interdisciplinary as a discipline, right? As opposed to a method, right? And yet he uses the word interdisciplinary method throughout his writing. I don't think, IDS is per se like a major or a discipline. It's just a way of navigating problems. It's a method. It's okay, as opposed to, just viewing this problem from the discipline that it pertains to, what else can I apply to possibly create something new here that might still be applicable? What else can I do here that I can still engage in information that I might have used previously? It's not a discipline on its own. It's just a method for navigating through all the other disciplines or problems you may face. And I think the author kind of mistook that and saw it as something else. So yeah.
I mean, I think those are all good pros for IDS, because I think you're relating it to what a lot of majors don't have, where it's, unless you're in a specific field, it doesn't have outside relatability. You can't like use any of the things in law unless you're a lawyer, or I mean, it would have to be a special circumstance to use those things. So I think that's definitely a big argument for IDS.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of saw a lot of points for IDS throughout this. You know, this whole concept of it impeding essential disciplinary competence, or as you guys said, you know, am I going to be able to beat out people that are focused entirely on a discipline? You know, something that I had talked about in my you know, just writing on perusal, was, you know, majority of the people that you talk to in the workplace today, if you talk to them and ask them, hey, what did you major in college, and you ask them what they're doing today, they're 60 to 70% of the time two completely different things. And that's because skills transcend, they fundamentally transcend. There's no such thing as, oh, I learned this one thing from one discipline and it can't be applied to elsewhere. You know, like I said, unless it's a very specific thing like medicine or something of the sort. And even then, we saw with that TED Med video that the way you kind of approach a large scale illness is kind of similar to how you might approach a case of crime. So even then, there's some application there as well. I don't think this whole concept of, oh, I need to know this one subject all the way through, or I forget the words they used. I think they said like a mature base in disciplines or something of the sort. I don't think it's necessarily crucial in that, as long as you're able to draw the connection between two different disciplines, who cares how much you know about one discipline? All you need to know is how to ask the right questions to further dig in, how to do research that'll ultimately lead to answers, and be able to draw unique connections and conclusions. So I don't think depth in a particular discipline is you know, especially going to help so long as you have the skills to navigate it, you know, apart from that.
Yeah, and I think those skills will be definitely more important because in the reading, it mentioned multiple times that IDS focuses on current issues of today. So, I mean, a lot of other majors can focus on current issues, but it's mostly things that have happened tons of years ago and were built off that. So IDS is a new degree, so you can't, it's just not, I can't think of the word, but like it's not derived from anywhere that was, you know, hundreds of years ago, like medicine or, you know, engineering or something like that.
I think it was, I just don't think we see it, but ultimately the way new disciplines are created is through thinking in an interdisciplinary manner, right? You're fusing together two things that didn't exist before. I think the issue that the author had here, and just in general, the perception of this is that it's seen as this really unconventional kind of thing that we do, when really most people practice being interdisciplinary on an almost daily basis, right? You might deal with a problem today that you would have seen, you know, maybe a couple weeks ago or a couple months ago, and you handled that problem through transfer. Or you're working on an assignment, or you're working on cooking a recipe and you decide to put two recipes together, and that's blending or whatever the hell. But I mean, conceptually, it's still the application. And I think people try to ignore that and kind of see it as this big, broad thing, when you really look at how simple and kind of intuitive this is, you realize the greatness of the application. And I think that's what's, you know, overall being missed out on here.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that. And I think that answers the value of the aspect of IDS is significant. I mean, you brought up several points on why their IDS is significant.
I think the point this thing was really trying to raise, and to a certain extent, I agree, right, is what is the point of being an IDS major, right? In the sense that, can't anyone really be interdisciplinary? Do you really need to major in interdisciplinary studies to think in an interdisciplinary manner? No, you don't. I mean, quite honestly, like, anyone can think in such a way without majoring in it. In fact, like I just said, most people were already thinking that way. They were already fusing things together. They were already being creative. So is there a particular need for it? No, right? But I think the value of this, so, you know, in academia, there's kind of two ways of going about it. So one, you choose your traditional major, you kind of major in it, as you mentioned, you take the 120 units, blah, blah, blah. And that brings about the skill set, I think, that's somewhat crucial to IDS, in that, can you research, right? Can you get into the depth of a subject? Say I choose mathematics or chemistry or whatever it is. How far can I go into really understanding it, right? Whereas fundamentally, the point of our IDS degree, and if you look at how it's at least structured at ASU, once you choose IDS, you choose two different concentrations as well, right? And the reason they do that isn't so you get to the depth of either of the majors per se, but for you to test how well can I draw connections between these two majors, right? So say I'm a philosophy or whatever major, or I don't know, sciences, arts, whatever. It's not how deep can I get into the world of philosophy, or how deep can I get into the world of the sciences or chemistry or whatever it is, but what are the connections I can draw in between them? I think both of them ultimately fit into the process of being interdisciplinary, but I don't think that the only way to become interdisciplinary is through an interdisciplinary major program, right? And I think that's what this argument was really trying to attack, was what is the value that this major provides? And I think from an inherent value point of view, I think it's just the ability to draw and make connections, right? Between two things that might not even necessarily seem similar, relevant, applicable, whatever it is you want to call it. How can I still kind of draw conclusions or connections that are still meaningful, insightful, something that someone hasn't necessarily thought before, versus what is the depth I can get to in a single discipline? Both skills are meaningful. Both skills have application in the interdisciplinary method or process. I think it's just different ways of going about it. You know, and to each their own, really. I both have their flaws, both have their strengths, but yeah.
I think that relates to question 4, because I also said that some of the most valuable practices IDS students should have is the ability to exchange information on individual interdisciplinary courses from a variety of sources so you can identify the most effective ways to approach and connect disciplines and skills. So, I mean, that was basically what you said, but I mean, way more vague, but I think it's just connecting the dots.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, if you look at even fundamentally what this course is doing for us, it's not really doing anything apart from just making us aware to our thought processes, right? It's all right, if I'm approaching a problem, as opposed to thinking about it from just within the scope that I had already presumed, how can I think about it a little differently? And if I do think about it differently, what is the solution that may result from that, right? And like I said, I think the biggest flaw in this whole thing is how they choose to perceive what being interdisciplinary is. Do I think it's a discipline on its own? No, it's just a method, right? It's asking questions in a certain way. It's fusing together certain thoughts and disciplines. It's just a way of conducting, you know, your learnings and the questions you ask and the solutions you may reach. So yeah. I think, you know, this week's questions all kind of fuse together a little more than they did in the past, and that, you know, before in the previous weeks, all the questions were a little bit different. They would take you down a different direction. But I think with this week, they all happen to kind of just play on each other because it all kind of comes together here.
Yeah, I would definitely say that knowing the strengths and weaknesses of your major, your skill set, just everything you're doing in life, and then I guess kind of just building on it upon that, you know. There isn't a way you can separate them, you know. But I definitely agree that with IDS, like as a major specifically, I really like the awareness aspect of it, in all honesty, because like we've been saying, transfer, conceptual blending, everyone does that on a daily basis, you know, especially like low end transfer. really bringing awareness to those and then applying it in more complex ways is something you might not think about right off the bat if you didn't know interdisciplinary existed. You know what I mean? So.
And I think that's kind of like a big takeaway, or as like the big point of this week's content is just to give like the strengths and weaknesses and then how to combat those cons. I think that the reading did give some real criticisms, but I feel like towards the end, most of them were combated in a way that was like almost solving them. And I think just the big point was important because it just shows how we do use them in our everyday lives, even if we don't know it. And I think that having IDS will make us more aware of those and use them, as you said, in a more methodical way.
And I think focusing in just a little bit on, what kind of offsets the inherent weaknesses of an IDS program. Like I said, I think the biggest kind of point or weakness that was mentioned in this was the kind of sense of ambiguousness, right? I think I'm trying to scroll back up there real quick. I forget the words he used, but I think it was conceptual confusion is what he said. I think the biggest way to avoid that is by embracing it, right? Oftentimes people in our day, myself included, when, this happens within a major, this happens outside of a major, but when we get confused, we often tend to not embrace it, right? It's this thing that we run away from because we might not necessarily know how to approach it or solve it. So I think the biggest thing to do in terms of addressing that weakness would be embracing it, right? Walk into it and understand that with confusion is often likely the process of you on the path, like, to discovering something, right? You're about to basically, like, you being confused isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's you on the track to figuring something out here. So I think embracing the confusion, embracing that ambiguity, and understanding that, ultimately, if you use that confusion to let yourself further delve into or dive into a subject matter or a discipline to answer something, it's ultimately going to lead to greater success. So I think it's just, I think with everything that was kind of talked about with this week, everything is perspective, right? You can choose to view confusion as this negative thing, or you can choose to look at it optimistically. You can choose to look at IDS as this thing that's too broad, and with a lack of scope, or you can choose to see that as, well, with these skills I can really do anything, right? But it all comes down to perspective and how do you want to approach it and how do you want to deal with the challenges as a result of both sides. Because when you do ultimately, narrow down into a single discipline or major or whatever it is you want to call it, there are inherent flaws with that as well. And I feel like those weren't exactly touched upon as much with this week's reading. I mean, it was slightly, but not really. So ultimately just being able to handle the flaws and, furthermore, just talking on handling the weaknesses, tolerating the ambiguity as well.
Yeah. I definitely think tolerance of ambiguity is one of the biggest concerns personally, for me being IDS. Yeah, I definitely wish they touched on it more in the reading. I'm surprised it's kind of, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest points or takeaways is there's no kind of right or wrong way in terms of going about this, right? I don't think it's necessarily flawed to be, kind of isolating yourself to a single discipline. Nor do I think it's flawed to be interdisciplinary, because ultimately they yield different results, right? They're designed to do different things. If you want to go into research and you want to really understand the subject matter and delve just further into it without the perspective, there is a place for that, right? And at the same time, if you're trying to solve really big problems, sometimes really big problems require just the scope of a discipline, right? And other times, really big problems require multiple disciplines to come together. So ultimately, I think the biggest kind of takeaway is perspective and intention, right? What am I trying to accomplish, right? And based off what I'm trying to accomplish, is it worth, taking a broader scope or broader lens and looking at multiple disciplines, or is there inherent value in just focusing on one, right? And the perspectives kind of vary on that, but I think, it almost seemed like the author was trying to just attack being interdisciplinary in all contexts, and I think that's what was flawed, right? I think there's value for both to come into play. It's just a matter of when does one ultimately need to be used versus the other? What is the intention? And also, how is my perspective in terms of incorporating one of those into solving whatever it is that I'm doing?
Yeah, I mean, definitely agree.
Um, and
The only other thing that I said about this week's content, besides like the reading, was just that it went over the history of interdisciplinary studies. And then I said, as it being a progressive and useful degree today. I mean, most of it was focusing on the weaknesses and like the pros and cons. Does anyone else have anything to say on this week's?
Not really. I'm trying to think what else there was this week. Yeah, I think it mostly all boils down to the points we've kind of already covered from what I'm seeing. Do you guys remember what the video was about? I'm trying to remember, but I don't really.
I think it was about how he had like or he was doing something like he was thinking analytically, and then he needed to think in more of a philosophical way, and then he had like he spoke about like a professor or something, and how he was talking about how to think more philosophically on analytical topics and how that can be beneficial. I think that's really all I remember from that though.
Yeah, I honestly don't remember it at all. But I'm sure the point was kind of already encompassed into what we talked about today. Yeah, I think that's about all I have, honestly.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
I guess the last thing would just be looking at the last, synthesis question. It says, how might you utilize this knowledge to get all the benefits and mitigate the weaknesses which of your specific program? I don't know that I know how to answer this question, honestly. The reason I personally switched into IDS was because I wanted to major in business and philosophy at the same time, but I didn't want to double major because that would imply more courses that I would have to take. So I figured this would kind of be like an easier way of getting into it. So I guess what I would do in terms of how might you utilize this knowledge to get all the benefits? I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's kind of just everything I just talked about with regards to just, keeping an open perspective in terms of when, there's purpose for interdisciplinary studies, and also just always posing the right questions. And as I kind of talked about earlier, tolerating the ambiguity, right? I mean, sometimes there will be confusion, but embracing it and welcoming the information of not just the disciplines that I am necessarily aware of, but disciplines that I might not be aware of as well, and bringing it all together. In terms of weaknesses, I mean, yeah, ultimately, if I am trying to get hired, as a company going to look for someone that might have graduated from the business school or something, preferably. But is there not a way to outweigh that? I mean, I believe so. A lot of it comes down to how well can you interview, how well can you present your skills, how well, ultimately, something that I talked about earlier was one of the biggest things that companies want to see is how well can you solve a problem, right? They're going to throw something your way, and how well are you able to turn it around and essentially reach resolution? So I think there's no greater problem solving mechanism or method than there is an interdisciplinary approach. So long as you're able to exemplify that, amongst some other experience, skill sets, social skills, whatever it is you want to call it, I think it's pretty easily offset.
I would have to agree. I'm not the best person to ask on this because I just switched to IDS like this spring. So I haven't really done enough of a substantial amount of classes, but I mean, I feel like all of it could be solved by being very broad with this answer because I mean, I'm still in it, so I can't like speak on it if I haven't finished it. But I mean, we all already know that we use transfer and we use high road and we use all these things in our daily lives. So I think implementing those, whether it's in a class or studying or whatever it may be, I feel like those will be beneficial to helping complete the program.
Yeah, I definitely feel like I really don't know IDS as much as I would like to yet. Granted, this is my first IDS class, but I'm definitely getting more of a grasp of the benefits and the weaknesses of of not only IDS but well, I guess yeah, of IDS, but it 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 feels like it's really gonna set me up well for, I guess, after college as well. You know what I mean? It can just be applied to anything. So
Yeah. I think that's about it, really, in terms of what I'm seeing. I don't know if you guys have anything else.
No.
no.
Alrighty. In terms of meeting next week, Carson, I know you said Claudia texted you. You might want to text her and just see if 4 p.m. if we want to just go back to the normal time for next week.
Okay.
And maybe just see if, who wants to set up the meetings, if she wants to go back to it, or I don't know if you want to keep doing it or whatever it is. Whatever's easier.
Okay.
But I think from there, whatever we see in the announcements at that point, 3 or 4 p.m., but Sunday. And yeah, I don't know that it's necessarily determined who's sending it out, but we can say you for now tentatively just to submit the assignment tonight. But if Claudia messages you before then saying she wants to do it and she sends it out, I'm sure that's fine. If I don't know if that's what you guys want to do, but I feel like that might be the easiest way to handle it.
Yeah, it sounds good.
All righty. That's about it, guys, I think.
Yeah.
All right. Well, have a good rest of your weekend. I'll see you guys.
Bye.